Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Call from Hell. The satellite phone crackled to life in the Afghan mountains, cutting through the pre-dawn silence like a blade. Staff Sergeant Cameron Stafford had been awake for 36 hours straight, leading reconnaissance missions through Taliban territory. His weathered hands, scarred from 15 years of military service, gripped the device with practiced efficiency. Stafford, he answered in his characteristic, gravelly voice. Cameron, the voice belonged to his mother, Marjorie Stafford, but carried a tremor he'd never heard before. Not even when his father died in the coal mines 20 years ago. Mom? What's wrong? Cameron's steel-gray eyes narrowed as he stepped away from his sleeping squad. At 38, he'd learned to read danger in the smallest details, and his mother's voice was screaming it. Your wife's new man just shoved your daughter's face into the fireplace. The words hit him like shrapnel. He said he'll finish the job tonight. Cameron's world tilted. Elena was only 12, his precious little girl with her mother's dark hair, but his own defiant spirit. The image of her face near flames made his combat-trained mind race through violent scenarios. What do you mean, new man? His voice dropped to the deadly whisper his men knew meant someone was about to die. Marjorie's sob crackled through the connection. She's been seeing Dennis Church for months. He moved in 3 weeks ago when you deployed. Elena tried to stop him from hitting Christina, another sob. Cameron, her face is burnt. She's in the hospital, but they released her to Christina's custody. That monster is still in your house. Cameron had killed 37 men in combat. He'd survived IEDs, ambushes, and torture. But nothing had prepared him for the rage, now coursing through his veins like molten steel. His hand crushed the phone so hard the plastic creaked. Where's Christina now? At the house with him. She won't answer my calls. Elena's with them, and I'm terrified. Mom. Cameron's voice cut through her panic like a command. I'm coming home. The backstory flooded his mind as he ended the call. Christina Proctor had been the rebellious daughter of a wealthy family when they met 15 years ago. She was 19, beautiful, and drawn to his danger like a moth to flame. Cameron was fresh out of basic training, all muscle and swagger, believing love could conquer anything. They married after a 6-month whirlwind romance, and Elena arrived 2 years later. But military life had worn Christina down. The deployments, the constant fear, the loneliness, she'd grown bitter and resentful. Cameron knew she'd been pulling away, but he'd attributed it to the stress of his recent special operations assignments. He'd been so focused on serving his country that he'd failed to see his own home front collapsing. Dennis Church. The name tasted like poison. Cameron knew him, a local mechanic with a reputation for bar fights and domestic disturbances. 10 years younger than Cameron, with the kind of pretty boy looks that fooled women into thinking muscles meant safety. Cameron had never liked him, but he'd never imagined the man would dare touch his family. His squad leader, Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Gilmore, approached through the darkness. Gilmore was a mountain of a man with kind eyes that had seen too much war. Stafford? You look like you've seen a ghost. Cameron's jaw worked silently for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the cold fury of a winter storm. I need emergency leave, sir. Family crisis. Gilmore studied his face in the moonlight. In 15 years of service, Cameron Stafford had never asked for leave, never complained, never shown weakness. He was the kind of soldier other soldiers wanted to be, unbreakable, loyal, and utterly reliable. What do you need? A ride home. Tonight. Gilmore didn't hesitate. Pack your gear. Chopper's ready in 20 minutes. As Cameron gathered his belongings, his mind was already shifting into tactical mode. This wasn't a rescue mission. It was war. And in war, Cameron Stafford had never lost. Chapter 2. Homecoming. The flight from Afghanistan to Colorado took 18 hours with military connections. Cameron spent every minute planning. He'd called his mother twice more during layovers, each conversation painting a darker picture. Christina had met Dennis Church at a local bar 6 months ago. While Cameron was risking his life in the mountains, She'd been playing house with a man who had a sealed juvenile record and a reputation for violence against women. Church had systematically isolated Elena from her friends, turned her mother against her, and now occupied Cameron's home like a conquering force. Elena had suffered second-degree burns on her left cheek when Church shoved her face first into the fireplace grate. The official story was an accident, but Elena had whispered the truth to her grandmother during a brief hospital visit. Church had been drinking, Christina had tried to leave, and Elena had stepped between them. His response was to grab the 12-year-old by the hair and demonstrate what happened to little bitches who don't know their place. Cameron's hands clenched into fists that could break concrete as he stared out the airplane window. He'd spent 15 years following rules of engagement, protecting civilians, fighting with honor. But honor was a luxury he could no longer afford. The plane touched down at Denver International at 11:47 p.m. Cameron retrieved his duffel bag and the locked case containing his personal weapons, items the military quietly allowed special operations soldiers to transport. He'd built a reputation as a man who solved problems permanently, and he'd need every tool at his disposal. Marjorie met him at the airport, her normally pristine appearance disheveled with worry. At 65, she was still the tough coal miner's wife who'd raised Cameron alone after his father's death. But tonight, she looked fragile. "How is she?" Cameron asked without preamble as they walked to her car. "Scared. Hurting. She asked about you every hour." Marjorie's voice broke. "Cameron, I've never seen her so small. She flinches when men speak too loud now." The rage in Cameron's chest crystallized into something colder and infinitely more dangerous. "Where are they now?" "Your house. I drove by an hour ago. Church's truck is still there." She paused. "Cameron, what are you planning to do?" He met her eyes in the dim parking garage lighting. "Whatever it takes." The drive to his house took 30 minutes through empty suburban streets. Cameron's neighborhood was middle-class military housing, well-maintained lawns, American flags, the kind of place where people minded their own business but looked out for each other's families. His house sat on a corner lot, isolated enough for privacy, but visible enough that neighbors would notice unusual activity. As they drove past, Cameron cataloged the tactical situation. Church's red pickup truck dominated the driveway. The living room lights were on, casting shadows through curtains Cameron had hung himself 5 years ago. His daughter was inside that house with a man who'd already proven his willingness to hurt children. "Drop me at the end of the block," Cameron said quietly. "Cameron, Mom." His voice carried the absolute authority of a battlefield commander. "Go home. Lock your doors. Don't answer the phone unless it's me. This ends tonight." Marjorie looked at her son, really looked at him, and saw something that made her shiver. This wasn't the idealistic young man who'd enlisted to serve his country. This was a weapon, forged by war and betrayal into something lethal. She kissed his cheek and whispered, "Be careful." Cameron stepped out into the Colorado night, every sense alert. He'd spent years learning to move through hostile territory, and his own neighborhood had become exactly that. As he approached his house through the shadows, he could hear voices through an open window, Christina's sharp tone and a man's deeper voice responding with crude laughter. His home, his daughter, his life, all of it contaminated by a man who thought violence made him strong. Cameron Stafford was about to teach Dennis Church the difference between a bully and a warrior. Chapter 3: Assessment and Infiltration. Cameron circled his own house like a predator studying prey. 15 years of special operations had taught him patience. The difference between a successful mission and a dead soldier was often measured in minutes of careful observation. The house was a 2-story colonial he'd bought with military savings and pride. Every board, every nail, every security measure was his handiwork. He knew which floorboards creaked, which windows were easier to open, where the sight lines were best. Church might be living there, but this was Cameron's territory. Through the kitchen window, he could see into the living room. Christina sat on the couch, still beautiful at 34, but wearing makeup that couldn't quite hide a bruise on her jaw. She was thinner than he remembered, with the hollow look of a woman living in constant tension. Dennis Church dominated the space like a conquering animal marking territory. At 28, he was all swagger and casual cruelty, wearing Cameron's favorite chair like a throne. Beer bottles littered the coffee table, and Cameron's military commendations had been removed from the mantel, replaced with nothing. But it was Elena's absence that sent ice through Cameron's veins. His daughter should have been visible from this angle if she was in the living room. Either she was hiding upstairs or, "Elena, get down here." Church's voice carried clearly through the window. "Your mama's boyfriend wants to talk to you." Cameron watched his daughter appear at the top of the stairs. Even from a distance, he could see the bandage covering the left side of her face. She moved slowly, fearfully, like an animal expecting another blow. "Elena, honey, please just come down." Christina's voice carried exhaustion and defeat. "Dennis just wants to apologize." The 12-year-old descended the stairs with visible reluctance. Cameron's trained eye cataloged everything. The way she favored her left side, the defensive posture, the quick glances toward escape routes. His little girl had learned to move like a combat veteran. "Come here, sweetheart." Church's voice was sickeningly sweet. "Uncle Dennis wants to make sure we're all friends." Elena approached to within arm's reach, but no closer. Smart girl. She'd learned to gauge striking distance. "See, here's the thing," Church continued, and Cameron could hear the alcohol in his voice. "Your daddy's not coming back. This is my house now, and you're my little girl. So we need to understand each other." Cameron's hand moved instinctively to the knife on his belt. Through the window, he watched Church lean forward in the chair, his chair. "You tell anybody about our little accident yesterday, and next time it won't be just your face. You understand me?" Elena nodded quickly, and Cameron saw tears on her cheeks. "Good girl. Now give Uncle Dennis a hug." "Dennis, she's hurt." "Maybe," Christina started. "Maybe you should shut up and let me handle this." Church's voice turned sharp. "Unless you want to go back to your parents and explain why your marriage failed." The dynamic became clear to Cameron in that moment. Christina wasn't just cheating. She was trapped, probably as afraid of Church as Elena was. But fear didn't excuse what she'd allowed to happen to their daughter. As Elena reluctantly approached Church for the demanded hug, Cameron made his decision. He'd seen enough. Moving with the silent precision of a night raid, he approached the back door. The spare key was still hidden under the loose brick where he'd left it. Apparently, Church wasn't smart enough to change the locks. Cameron retrieved it and slowly, carefully unlocked the door. The house smelled wrong. Beer, cigarettes, and something else, the sour smell of fear. Church had turned his home into enemy territory, and Cameron was about to liberate it. He moved through the kitchen and toward the hallway, every step calculated to avoid the creaking boards. From his position, he could see into the living room where Church was forcing Elena to sit on his lap while he explained the new rules. "Your mama and I are going to be very happy," Church was saying, "and you're going to help us be happy by being a good little girl. No more calling your grandma with stories. No more asking about your daddy. He's not coming back because he doesn't want you anymore." Elena's small voice cut through Cameron like a blade. "My daddy does want me. He loves me." Church's hand moved to grip her arm, and Cameron saw his daughter wince. "Your daddy is a loser who cares more about playing soldier than taking care of his family. If he really loved you, he'd be here instead of..." "Instead of what?" The voice came from the hallway, calm and conversational. Church's head snapped around, and Christina gasped. Cameron Stafford stepped into his living room like death itself. He was still wearing his combat fatigues, and 15 years of war had carved his face into something that made strong men step aside. His gray eyes moved from Church to Christina to Elena with the clinical assessment of a sniper acquiring targets. "Daddy," Elena tried to stand, but Church's grip on her arm tightened. Well, Church said, his voice carrying false bravado. "Look what crawled back from the desert. We weren't expecting you." Cameron's eyes locked onto the hand gripping his daughter's arm. "Take your hands off my child. Actually, I think we need to have a conversation about whose child she is now." Church pulled Elena closer, and she whimpered. "See, her mama and I have been making some changes around here. Maybe you should talk to your lawyer before." Cameron moved. 15 years of combat training compressed into one fluid motion. Church found himself flat on his back with 180 pounds of Special Forces soldier on his chest and a knife blade pressed against his throat hard enough to draw blood. "Daddy, don't." Elena's voice was terrified. Cameron looked up at his daughter without moving the blade. "Baby girl, go to your room. Now." "Cameron, please," Christina started. "You." His voice stopped her cold. "Don't move." Elena ran upstairs, and Cameron heard her bedroom door close. Only then did he look down at the man who'd burned his child's face. "Dennis Church," he said conversationally. "We need to talk." Church's eyes were wide with terror. This close, Cameron could smell his fear mixed with alcohol and cheap cologne. "You're making a mistake, man. I'll call the cops. You'll listen." The knife pressed deeper, and Church's protest died. "You put your hands on my daughter. You burned her face. You threatened to finish the job." Cameron's voice never rose above a whisper. "Do you understand what that makes you?" Church tried to speak, but could only manage a strangled sound. "It makes you dead," Cameron continued. "The only question is how long it takes, and how much you suffer first." From a couch, Christina found her voice. "Cameron, stop. You can't just..." "Can't what?" He looked at her without moving from Church's chest. "Can't protect my daughter? Can't defend my home? Can't deal with the man who's been terrorizing my family while I was serving my country?" "I'm calling the police." Christina reached for her phone. "Go ahead." Cameron's voice was absolutely calm. "Call them. Explain why there's a man in my house who's been abusing my child. Explain why you let happen. Explain why you chose this piece of garbage over your own daughter's safety." Christina's hand froze on the phone. Cameron looked back down at Church. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to get up, walk out of my house, and never come back. You're going to leave town tonight and never contact my wife or daughter again. Because if I see you again, if I hear you've spoken to them, if you so much as drive down this street..." The knife pressed deeper. "I will hunt you down and show you what 15 years of war teaches a man about pain." Church nodded frantically. Cameron stood up and stepped back, but his hand remained on the knife handle. "Get out." Church scrambled to his feet, blood trickling from the shallow cut on his throat. He looked at Christina desperately. "Christina, you can't let him." "She's not letting me do anything," Cameron interrupted. "She's choosing. Her husband and daughter, or the man who burns children's faces." He looked at his wife. "Choose now." The silence stretched like a wire about to snap. Then Christina spoke, and her words shattered Cameron's world completely. "Dennis, wait." She stood up, moving to Church's side. "Cameron, you can't just come back and expect everything to be the same. We've moved on. Elena will adapt. This is our life now." Cameron stared at his wife, the woman he'd loved for 15 years, the mother of his child, and saw a stranger. "You're choosing him?" "I'm choosing stability over a man who's never home, who cares more about the military than his family, who thinks violence solves everything. He burned our daughter's face. It was an accident." "Bullshit." The word exploded from Cameron with such force that both Christina and Church stepped backward. "She told my mother exactly what happened." He shoved her face into the fireplace and threatened to finish the job. "Elena exaggerates." "Get out." Cameron's voice dropped to absolute zero. "Both of you, get out of my house." "This is my house too," Christina said. "I have rights." Cameron looked at his wife, really looked at her, and saw something that made his heart turn to stone. She wasn't just defending Church out of fear or confusion. She genuinely believed she'd made the right choice. She'd chosen a man who hurt their child over the father who'd spent 15 years providing for them. "You have 1 hour," he said quietly. "Pack whatever you want and leave. Elena stays with me." "Like hell." "Elena is 12 years old with burns on her face from the man you're defending. What judge do you think will award custody to the mother who chose her abuser over her child's safety?" Christina's face went white as the legal reality hit her. Church, emboldened by her support, took a step forward. "You can't just kick us out. I live here now." Cameron smiled, and the expression was terrifying. "You're right. Let me correct that." He pulled out his phone and dialed 911. "Yes, I'd like to report a home invasion. A man named Dennis Church broke into my house and assaulted my 12-year-old daughter. He's still here, and I'm detaining him until police arrive. Church's eyes went wide. That's not, you can't. Can't what? Tell the truth. Cameron looked at him with casual menace. You want to call your lawyer from jail and explain the burn marks on a child's face? You want your name in the newspaper as the man who abused a soldier's daughter while he was deployed. The color drained from Church's face as he realized the trap. Even if the charges didn't stick, the publicity would destroy him in their small military town. Cameron, please. Christina's voice was desperate now. Don't do this. We can work something out. We could have, Cameron said without looking at her. Before you chose him over Elena. Before you let him hurt our child. Before you decided that a man who threatens children was worth more than the father who's been protecting this country for 15 years. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. You have a choice to make, Christina. Leave with him now, or stay and explain to the police why you've been harboring a child abuser. But either way, Elena stays with me. The sirens were getting louder. Church grabbed Christina's hand. We have to go. Now. Cameron watched his wife hesitate for one agonizing moment. Then she grabbed her purse and followed Church toward the door. As they reached the threshold, Cameron called out one last time. Christina. She turned, hope flickering in her eyes. This isn't over, he said quietly. You chose him over our daughter. You let him burn her face and then defended him. I'll make sure Elena knows exactly who her mother really is. The hope died in her eyes, replaced by something that looked almost like relief, as if she'd been waiting for an excuse to burn everything down. The door closed behind them just as the police cars pulled into the driveway. Cameron looked up at the stairs, where he could see Elena peeking around the corner. It's okay, baby girl, he called softly. Daddy's home. But even as he said it, Cameron knew nothing would ever be okay again. His marriage was over, his family was destroyed, and his daughter was traumatized. And Dennis Church was still breathing. That was a problem he intended to solve. Chapter 4. Allies and Intelligence. 3 days after the confrontation, Cameron sat in the law office of Wesley Webster, the best military family attorney in Colorado. Webster was a former JAG officer who specialized in cases involving deployed soldiers and their families. His office walls were lined with commendations and photos with various military leaders. But his expression was grim as he reviewed the police reports. The good news is that Child Protective Services interviewed Elena and documented her injuries, Webster said, his voice clinical. The burns, the defensive wounds on her arms, the psychological trauma, it's all on record. Church was arrested for child abuse, but he posted bail. Cameron's jaw tightened. Where is he now? That's the problem. He and your wife left town the night you returned. The bail bondsman is looking for him, but they could be anywhere. And Elena stays with you, at least temporarily. The court won't place a child with the parent who chose her abuser over her safety. But Cameron, Webster leaned forward. Christina can still fight for custody. If she claims she was afraid of Church, that she's left him now, she might convince a judge she was a victim too. Cameron stared out the window at the mountains in the distance. She wasn't a victim. She made her choice. Proving that in court is different from knowing it in your heart. Over the next week, Cameron threw himself into 2 missions, caring for Elena and gathering intelligence on Church and Christina. His daughter was seeing a military therapist who specialized in trauma, slowly working through the fear and pain. The burns would heal, but the emotional scars would take longer. Elena had nightmares every night, waking up screaming for her father. During the day, she clung to Cameron like a lifeline, afraid he might disappear again. He'd taken emergency leave to be with her, but his commanding officer had made it clear that his military career was in jeopardy if he didn't return soon. I'm scared they'll come back, Elena whispered one night as Cameron tucked her into bed. They won't, he promised. I'll never let anyone hurt you again. But what if you have to go back to Afghanistan? Cameron looked at his daughter, his brave, damaged little girl, and made a decision that would change everything. I'm not going back, baby. Daddy's staying home now. The next morning, Cameron called his commanding officer and submitted his resignation from the Army. 15 years of service, a distinguished career, a pension, all of it secondary to his daughter's safety. Meanwhile, His investigation into Church was bearing fruit. Cameron had called in favors with military intelligence contacts, former Special Forces soldiers now working in private security, and old friends in law enforcement. The picture that emerged was worse than he'd imagined. Dennis Church wasn't just a violent man. He was a predator who'd been escalating for years. His sealed juvenile record included arrests for animal cruelty and assault. As an adult, he'd been fired from 3 jobs for harassment and had restraining orders filed by 2 ex-girlfriends. He was exactly the kind of man who targeted vulnerable women and their children. But it was the call from Fernando Goodrich, a former Delta Force operator now working as a private investigator, that gave Cameron the leverage he needed. "Found them," Fernando said over the phone. "Church and your wife are in Reno, Nevada, living in a cheap motel and running low on money. But Cameron, there's something else you need to know." Cameron waited. Church has been in contact with a man named Luis Ellison. Ellison runs girls for a casino owner. Young girls, if you know what I mean. Word is Church owes him money from gambling debts and is looking for ways to pay it back. The implication hit Cameron like a physical blow. "Elena, that's my read. Church is the kind of guy who'd sell his own mother if the price was right. And a 12-year-old girl from a military family." Fernando's voice trailed off. Cameron felt something cold and predatory uncoil in his chest. Church wasn't just an abuser. He was planning to traffic his daughter. "Fernando, I need everything you can get me on Luis Ellison. Addresses, routines, associates, weaknesses. Everything. Cameron, what are you planning? War." The next phase of Cameron's investigation took him into the darkest corners of his network. Jeremiah Carr, a former military intelligence officer now working cybersecurity, helped him access Church's financial records, communications, and travel patterns. What they found confirmed Cameron's worst fears. Church had been planning Elena's abduction for weeks before Cameron returned. He'd researched prices for young girls in various trafficking networks, made contact with buyers, and even scouted routes from Colorado to Mexico. Christina either didn't know or didn't care. Her phone records showed constant fights with Church about money and increasingly desperate attempts to contact her wealthy parents. But it was the discovery of Church's insurance policies that gave Cameron the perfect weapon for his revenge. "Look at this," Carr said, pointing to his computer screen. "Church took out a life insurance policy on your wife 3 weeks ago. Christina signed it, but I doubt she read the fine print." Cameron studied the documents. "What am I looking at? A murder contract. If something happens to Christina, Church gets $200,000. But here's the beautiful part. He used forged documents to inflate her asset value. The insurance company doesn't know she's broke." The plan began forming in Cameron's mind like a military operation. Church thought he was the predator, but he'd made a fatal mistake. He'd threatened a soldier's child. Cameron's phone rang. The caller ID showed his mother's number. "Cameron? Elena's asking for you. She had another nightmare." "I'll be right there, Mom." He looked at Carr. "Keep digging. I want to know everything about Church's network, his debts, his fears. Everything." As Cameron drove home to comfort his daughter, he was already 3 steps ahead of his enemies. Church and Christina thought they were safe in Nevada, beyond his reach. They had no idea they were actually trapped in a cage of their own making. And Cameron Stafford was about to spring the trap. Chapter 5, The Setup. 2 weeks later, Cameron received the call he'd been waiting for. Timothy Schroeder, a former Special Forces demolitions expert who now worked as a security consultant for various interests, had found the perfect opening. "Church is in debt to Luis Ellison for $60,000, Schroeder reported. Gambling, cocaine, and some other expensive habits. Ellison's crew is putting pressure on him. They want their money by the end of the month or they're taking it out of his hide." Cameron absorbed this information while watching Elena practice piano in their living room. She was getting better, sleeping through most nights now, but she still flinched when men spoke too loudly. Every day, she lived with fear was another debt Church owed. What about Christina? She's trying to get money from her parents, but they've cut her off. Apparently, they found out about Church and decided their daughter made her choice. She's working as a cocktail waitress at a casino, but it's barely enough for rent. Perfect. Cameron's voice was calm. but his eyes were cold as winter steel. Here's what we're going to do. The plan Cameron laid out was elegant in its simplicity and brutal in its effectiveness. It would destroy Church and Christina while staying within the bounds of plausible deniability. More importantly, it would ensure they could never threaten Elena again. Phase 1 involved Gerard Porter, another former special operations soldier who now worked as a con artist specializing in financial fraud. Porter would approach Church with an opportunity to make easy money, a fake drug deal that would put Church in debt to extremely dangerous people. Phase 2 would use Christina's desperation against her. Cameron had Fernando Goodrich pose as a private investigator working for her parents, offering to help her escape Church in exchange for testimony about his abuse of Elena. The testimony would be real. Cameron wanted every detail of Church's crimes on record, but the escape would lead Christina directly into Cameron's trap. Phase 3 was the most dangerous. Cameron would personally ensure that Church faced consequences for his crimes. Consequences that would be permanent and untraceable. "This is dark, even for us," Schroeder said after Cameron finished explaining. "You sure about this?" Cameron looked at Elena, who was struggling with a difficult passage. Her left hand still trembled slightly from nerve damage caused by the burns. "He hurt my daughter and threatened to finish the job. He planned to sell her to human traffickers. I'm not just sure. I'm looking forward to it." The operation began 3 days later when Porter approached Church at a Reno casino bar. Porter was a master at reading marks, and Church was exactly the kind of arrogant, desperate man who fell for get-rich-quick schemes. "I hear you're looking for work," Porter said, sliding onto the bar stool next to Church. Church looked him over suspiciously. Porter was dressed like a successful businessman. Expensive suit, gold watch, the kind of confidence that came with money. "Depends on the work. Simple courier job. Drive a package from here to Los Angeles. No questions asked. $5,000 for 1 day's work." Church's eyes lit up. "What kind of package?" "The kind you don't ask about," Porter said with a meaningful look. "But it's worth a lot to certain people, and they pay well for discretion." Over the next hour, Porter spun a story about high-stakes drug distribution that was pure fiction but sounded authentic to Church's limited criminal experience. By the end of the conversation, Church was convinced he'd found his solution to the Ellison debt. "When do we do this?" Church asked. "Tomorrow night. But here's the thing. This organization doesn't tolerate failure. You take their money, you deliver their product, or you disappear. Permanently." Church nodded eagerly, already counting the money in his head. Meanwhile, Fernando Goodrich was approaching Christina at the casino where she worked. He'd been watching her for days, noting her exhaustion, her growing fear of Church's increasingly violent mood swings, her desperate phone calls to friends and family begging for money. "Christina Stafford?" Goodrich approached her during her break. She looked up from her cigarette with suspicious eyes. "Who's asking?" "My name is Fernando Goodrich. I'm a private investigator working for your parents." Christina's facade cracked slightly. "My parents? They're concerned about you and their granddaughter. They've hired me to help you escape your current situation safely." For a moment, hope flickered in Christina's eyes. Then it died as reality set in. "They disowned me. They said a lot of things in anger. But Elena is their granddaughter, and they've seen the photos from the hospital." Goodrich let that sink in. "They want to help you start over, away from Dennis Church. But they need something in return." "What?" "The truth. Everything that happened to Elena, everything Church has done. They want a full statement they can use to ensure he never gets near their granddaughter again." Christina looked around the casino, at the flashing lights and desperate gamblers, at the life she'd traded her family for. "What would happen to Dennis?" "That depends on what you tell me. But if you're honest about what he did to Elena." Goodrich shrugged. "Well, child abusers don't do well in prison." The hook was set. Christina agreed to meet with Goodrich the next night to give her statement. She had no idea she was walking into Cameron's trap. Back in Colorado, Cameron was making his own preparations. He'd put Elena in his mother's care with a cover story about business travel, ensuring she'd be safe and protected. His house was empty now, ready to serve as the final stage of his plan. Elena hugged him tightly before he left. "You promise you'll come back?" I promise, baby girl. Daddy's going to make sure the bad people can never hurt you again. As Cameron drove toward the airport, his phone buzzed with updates from his team. Church had taken the bait and was preparing for the fake drug run. Christina was getting ready to confess everything about Church's abuse. And Luis Ellison's crew was closing in on Church for the money he owed. All the pieces were in motion. By the end of the week, Church and Christina would face the consequences of their choices. Cameron had spent 15 years learning to hunt terrorists in foreign lands. Now he was bringing those skills home to hunt the monsters who'd threatened his child. And unlike his enemies, Cameron Stafford never missed his target. Chapter 6. The Trap Springs. The fake drug deal went exactly as Cameron had planned. Church drove to the designated meeting point, a warehouse outside Las Vegas, expecting to collect his $5,000 and solve his debt problems. Instead, he found himself surrounded by men who worked for Luis Ellison. Porter had tipped off Ellison's crew about Church's location, claiming Church had been bragging about stealing drugs from their operation. When Church arrived with Porter's empty suitcase, thinking it contained cocaine worth $50,000, Ellison's men were waiting. Dennis Church, the lead enforcer, a mountain of a man called Terrence Avery, smiled without warmth. You've been a hard man to find. Church looked around at the four men surrounding him and realized he'd walked into a trap. Look, there's been a mistake. No mistake. You owe our boss $60,000, and now you're trying to steal from us too. Avery gestured to the empty suitcase. That's insulting. I don't know what you're talking about. I was told this was a courier job. Avery hit him with a right cross that dropped Church to his knees. Wrong answer. You've got two choices. Pay us what you owe, plus another $20,000 for the disrespect, or we start breaking things. Church spit blood and tried to think. $80,000 might as well have been $8 million. I don't have that kind of money. Then we'll take it in trade. Avery's smile turned predatory. I hear you've got access to a pretty little girl. Young, blonde, military family. That's worth good money to the right buyers. The blood drained from Church's face as he realized they knew about Elena. How did you? You've been asking around about prices for kids. Word gets around. Avery hauled Church to his feet. Here's the deal. You deliver the girl to us, and we'll call your debt even. You've got 48 hours. I can't. She's not here. She's with her father. Then you better figure out how to get her away from Daddy. Avery's voice was casual death. Because if you don't, we're going to start with your girlfriend and work our way up to parts you really don't want to lose. As Church stumbled away from the warehouse, bleeding and terrified, he had no idea he'd just been maneuvered exactly where Cameron wanted him. The debt was real, but Ellison's crew had been fed information designed to make them fixate on Elena. Now Church was desperate enough to try anything. Meanwhile, Christina was sitting in a hotel room with Fernando Goodrich, spilling everything about her relationship with Church. The digital recorder captured every detail. How Church had systematically isolated her from friends and family, how he'd become increasingly violent, and finally, the night he'd burned Elena's face. He grabbed her by the hair, Christina said, tears streaming down her face. She was trying to protect me, and he shoved her face right into the fireplace grate. And when she was screaming, he said next time he'd put her all the way in. Goodrich kept his expression neutral, but inside he was thinking about his own daughter, safe at home in Colorado. What did you do? Nothing. The word came out as a broken whisper. I was so scared. He said if I called for help, he'd kill her. Kill both of us. So I took her to the hospital and said it was an accident. And when your husband came home, Christina's face crumpled. I chose Dennis. I actually chose the man who burned my baby's face over her father. She looked up at Goodrich with hollow eyes. What kind of mother does that make me? The kind who is scared, Goodrich said gently, but also the kind who's ready to make it right. After 3 hours of testimony, Goodrich had enough evidence to put Church away for decades. But Cameron's plan was bigger than prison time. There's one more thing, Goodrich said as he packed up the recorder. Your parents want you to call your ex-husband. Apologize to Elena. Try to start making amends. Cameron will never forgive me. Maybe not, but Elena deserves to hear from her mother that she's sorry. Christina nodded and dialed Cameron's number with shaking hands. Cameron was sitting in a rental car outside the hotel when his phone rang. He'd been watching the building, coordinating with his team, waiting for this moment. "Christina," he answered without emotion. "Cameron, can I talk to Elena?" "Elena's asleep. She has nightmares, about the man you chose over her father." Christina sobbed into the phone. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I just gave a statement to a private investigator. Everything Dennis did to her, all of it. I want him to pay." Cameron's voice remained cold. "Too late for that. Please, Cameron. I know I can't fix this, but I want to try. I want to protect her now. Where's Church?" "He left this morning. Said he had business in Las Vegas." "Cameron, he's been talking about Elena, about getting her back. I think he's planning something. I know exactly what he's planning." Cameron's voice carried a deadly promise. "And I'm ready for him." Church returned to their motel room at 2 a.m., drunk and desperate. He found Christina packing her clothes. "Where the hell do you think you're going?" "Away from you." Christina didn't look up from her suitcase. "I called Cameron. I told him everything you did to Elena." Church grabbed her arm and spun her around. "You did what? I'm not protecting you anymore. You're a monster, and I was a fool for thinking." Church backhanded her across the face, sending her crashing into the dresser. "You stupid bitch. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Christina tasted blood and realized this was how it ended, with the truth. "I've done what I should have done months ago." "Well, you just signed Elena's death warrant." Church pulled out his phone and showed her a text message from Ellison's crew. "These people want your daughter, and thanks to your big mouth, I'm going to give her to them." For the first time since choosing Church over her family, Christina felt real clarity. She lunged for Church's phone, desperate to delete the message, to somehow undo the danger she'd helped create. Church caught her wrist and twisted until she heard bones crack. "Too late, baby. I'm going back to Colorado tomorrow, and I'm taking Elena with me. You can explain to her daddy how your betrayal got his little girl sold to the highest bidder." As Christina collapsed to the floor, cradling her broken wrist, Church was already planning Elena's abduction. He had no idea that every word of their conversation was being recorded by surveillance equipment Cameron's team had planted in their room. He also had no idea that Cameron Stafford was already in Las Vegas, waiting in the parking lot outside their motel. The hunt was about to begin. Chapter 7. The Final Hunt. Cameron watched from his rental car as Church stumbled out of the motel room at 3 a.m., heading for his truck. Through the surveillance feed from their room, he'd heard every word. Church's plan to abduct Elena, Christina's broken wrist, the threats against his daughter's life. The rage in Cameron's chest had crystallized into something cold and surgical. This was no longer about justice or revenge. This was about eliminating a threat to his child's existence. Church drove to an all-night diner, where he met with two men Cameron recognized from Ellison's crew. Through binoculars, Cameron watched them slide a folder across the table, probably containing Elena's photo, her school schedule, and other intelligence Church had provided. Cameron made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He pulled out his phone and sent a single text message to Fernando Goodrich: "Execute Phoenix Protocol." Phoenix Protocol was their code for the final phase of the operation, the phase that would ensure Church and Christina could never threaten Elena again. It was also the phase that would make Cameron a killer outside the sanctioned boundaries of war. An hour later, Church's truck broke down on a lonely stretch of Nevada highway. The mechanical failure wasn't accidental. Schroeder had been tracking the vehicle and activated a remote device that disabled the engine at precisely the right moment. When Church called for a tow truck, the voice that answered belonged to Jeremiah Carr. "AAA Roadside Assistance. We can have someone out there in about an hour." "An hour? Look, this is an emergency." "Best we could do, sir. Dispatcher says you're in a pretty remote area." Church cursed and hung up, unaware that he'd just arranged his own death. Cameron arrived at the breakdown site 30 minutes later, driving a stolen tow truck. He found Church sitting on the truck's tailgate, smoking and talking on his phone about flights to Denver. "Thank God," Church said as Cameron pulled up. "I thought you guys forgot about me." Cameron stepped out of the tow truck wearing coveralls and a baseball cap pulled low. In the darkness, Church couldn't see his face clearly. "Let's take a look at your engine," Cameron said. walking around to the front of Church's truck. Church followed, still talking. I need to get to Denver as fast as possible. There's a situation with my stepdaughter. Cameron spun around and drove his fist into Church's solar plexus, doubling him over. As Church gasped for air, Cameron grabbed him by the throat and lifted him off the ground. "Dennis Church," Cameron said quietly. "Remember me?" Recognition flooded Church's eyes just before Cameron threw him to the ground. "You burned my daughter's face," Cameron said, circling Church like a predator. "You threatened to finish the job. You planned to sell her to human traffickers." Each sentence was punctuated by a kick to Church's ribs. "And you thought you could run away and hide in Nevada." Church tried to crawl away, but Cameron grabbed his ankle and dragged him back. "Please," Church gasped. "I'll disappear. I'll never come near her again. I swear." "You're right," Cameron said, pulling out the knife he'd held to Church's throat weeks ago. "You'll never come near her again." What happened next took place in the darkness of the Nevada desert, witnessed only by the stars and a man who'd spent 15 years learning efficient ways to end human lives. When Cameron drove away an hour later, Dennis Church had simply vanished, another missing person in a state where people disappeared regularly. His body would never be found, buried deep in a mine shaft that had been abandoned for decades. Back at the motel, Christina was packing the last of her belongings when Fernando Goodrich knocked on her door. "Mrs. Stafford, I have news about the Church situation." Christina opened the door with her good hand, her broken wrist wrapped in a makeshift sling. "What kind of news?" "Dennis Church is gone. Permanently." Something in Goodrich's tone made Christina step backward. "What do you mean, gone?" "I mean he'll never hurt your daughter again. He'll never hurt anyone again." Christina's face went white as the implication hit her. "Cameron killed him." "Cameron was never here," Goodrich said calmly. "According to all official records, he's been in Colorado taking care of Elena. You, on the other hand, were the last person seen with Church. You had a public fight, he hit you, and then he disappeared. You're going to frame me for murder? I'm going to give you a choice." Goodrich stepped into the room and closed the door. "Choice 1. You disappear too. Leave the country, change your name, and never contact Elena or Cameron again. In exchange, Church's body is never found, and you're free to start over somewhere else. And choice 2. You fight for custody of Elena. You claim you were a victim, that you've changed, that you deserve another chance. And in response, we release the surveillance recordings of you choosing Church over Elena, defending him after he burned her face, and helping him plan her abduction." Christina sank onto the bed, the weight of her choices finally crushing her. "You recorded everything? Everything, including Church's plan to sell Elena to traffickers and your knowledge of it." Goodrich's voice was merciless. "What jury do you think will give custody to a mother who helped plan her own daughter's sex trafficking?" The silence stretched between them like a grave. "There's also the matter of the life insurance policy Church took out on you," Goodrich continued. "The one with the forged documents inflating your asset value. Insurance fraud is a federal crime." Christina looked up with hollow eyes. "How long do I have to decide?" "The next flight to Mexico leaves in 4 hours. There's a passport and $10,000 in this envelope." He placed it on the dresser. "After that, the choice is made for you." As Goodrich left the room, Christina stared at the envelope that represented her only chance at freedom. She thought about Elena, her daughter's burned face, her nightmares, her desperate need for safety and love. For the first time in months, Christina made a choice that put Elena's needs before her own. Chapter 8. Blood Price. 3 hours later, Cameron stood in the Denver airport watching security footage of Christina boarding a flight to Mexico City. She was traveling under a false identity, carrying forged documents, and would disappear into a life of exile and regret. His phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Grandma made pancakes. Are you coming home today?" Cameron typed back, "On my way, baby girl." Forever this time. But before he could start truly over with Elena, there was one final piece of business to handle. Luis Ellison and his crew were still expecting Church to deliver Elena. When Church failed to appear, they'd start looking for alternative ways to collect their debt. That couldn't be allowed to happen. Cameron drove to a warehouse district in Aurora, where Fernando had arranged a meeting with Ellison's crew. They thought they were meeting with Church's associates to discuss Elena's transfer. Instead, they were walking into an execution. Terrence Avery and 3 other men arrived at the warehouse expecting to collect a 12-year-old girl. They found Cameron Stafford waiting alone in the darkness. "Where's Church?" Avery demanded. "Dennis Church is dead," Cameron said simply. Avery's hand moved toward his gun, but Cameron was faster. 15 years of combat training compressed into one fluid motion, knife drawn, thrown, and buried in Avery's throat before he could clear his holster. The other 3 men tried to react, but they were criminals, not soldiers. Cameron had been killing people professionally since before they learned to shave. When the warehouse fell silent, for bodies lay cooling on the concrete floor, Cameron methodically searched each man, collecting phones, wallets, and weapons. Within an hour, he'd identified their entire network and begun dismantling it. By dawn, Luis Ellison was dead in his penthouse apartment, along with his top lieutenants. Cameron had used their own drugs to stage overdoses, their own weapons to create murder-suicides, their own criminal connections to ensure the authorities would write it off as a gang war. The threat to Elena was eliminated at its source. Cameron drove home as the sun rose over the Colorado mountains, washing the blood from his hands at a gas station bathroom. He'd killed 9 people in 12 hours, but Elena would never need to know that. She would grow up believing her father was a hero who'd serve his country with honor. She would never know that he'd also served her with methods that had no honor at all. When Cameron walked into his mother's house, Elena ran to him with the boundless joy of a child who'd been afraid her parent might never come home. "Daddy, you're back." Cameron hugged his daughter tight, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling her small heartbeat against his chest. "I'm never leaving again, baby girl. Promise?" "I promise." As Elena chattered about her week with Grandma, showing him drawings and piano pieces she'd learned, Cameron made silent vows. He would raise her to be strong, to choose good people, to never accept abuse from anyone. He would teach her to defend herself, to trust her instincts, to value herself too highly to settle for scraps of affection from broken people. And he would never, ever let her know what he'd become to keep her safe. Chapter 9. The New Beginning. 6 months later, Cameron stood in the backyard of their new house, watching Elena play with their dog, a German shepherd he'd named Ranger. They'd moved to a smaller town where Elena could start fresh, where nobody knew about the burns on her face or the mother who'd abandoned her. Elena was thriving. The nightmares had stopped, her grades were excellent, and she'd made friends with children whose parents had military backgrounds. She was learning to play guitar, taking martial arts classes, and slowly becoming the confident girl she was meant to be. Cameron had found work as a security consultant, using his military skills in ways that kept him close to home. His reputation in certain circles ensured a steady stream of clients who needed problems solved quietly and permanently. He was building a comfortable life for Elena while maintaining skills that might be needed again. "Daddy, watch this," Elena called out as she demonstrated a new guitar technique her instructor had taught her. Cameron applauded genuinely. "That's beautiful, sweetheart. I want to play it for Mom when she comes back." Cameron's expression never changed, but his heart clenched. Elena still asked about Christina sometimes, still hoped her mother would return with explanations and apologies. Cameron had told her that Mommy was sick and needed to go away to get better, that it might be a long time before she could come home. He would never tell Elena that Christina had chosen her abuser over her own child. He would never explain that some betrayals were unforgivable. Elena would grow up believing her mother loved her, but was troubled. Not that she'd been abandoned by a woman who valued a violent man over her daughter's safety. That night, after Elena went to bed, Cameron sat on his porch and reviewed the security reports from his team. Christina was living in a small town in Mexico, working as an English teacher, slowly drinking herself to death with guilt and tequila. She made no attempt to contact Elena or return to the United States. Church's disappearance had been written off as a probable suicide. Desperate gamblers often vanished when their debts became unmanageable. Ellison's crew had been blamed for his murder, and their subsequent deaths were attributed to rival drug dealers. No connection had been made to Cameron or Elena. The official story was that a troubled man had threatened a soldier's family, then fled when confronted. Justice had been served through legal channels, and everyone had moved on. The truth was that Cameron Stafford had become something darker than a soldier, but more protective than a father. He'd crossed lines that could never be uncrossed, but Elena was safe, happy, and free to become whoever she wanted to be. A year later, Elena asked the question Cameron had been dreading. "Daddy, is Mommy ever coming home?" They were sitting at the kitchen table, working on her math homework. Elena was 13 now, taller and more mature, but still his little girl. Cameron looked into eyes that held his own steel-gray determination and made a choice. "No, sweetheart. Mommy made some very bad decisions, and she can't come back." Elena absorbed this with the gravity of a child who'd already learned that adults could be dangerous. Did she choose the bad man over us? Cameron's heart broke at how perceptive his daughter was. "Yes, baby, she did." Elena nodded slowly. "Then we're better off without her." "You don't have to feel that way." "Yes, I do." Elena's voice carried a finality that reminded Cameron of himself. "She let him hurt me and chose him anyway. That's not what mothers do." Cameron pulled Elena into a hug, marveling at her strength and wisdom. She was going to be extraordinary, not because of what she'd survived, but because of what she'd learned from surviving it. "I love you, Elena." "I love you too, Daddy. Thank you for coming home." As the sun set over their new life, Cameron reflected on the prices he'd paid and the debts he'd collected. He'd lost his marriage, his military career, and parts of his soul. But Elena was safe, strong, and free. Dennis Church was dead and rotting in a desert grave. Christina was in exile, paying for her choices with isolation and regret. The men who'd threatened to traffic his daughter had been eliminated with surgical precision. Cameron Stafford had come home from war to find war in his own house. He'd fought it with the same lethal efficiency he'd brought to Afghanistan, and he'd won completely. The cost had been everything he used to be. The reward was everything Elena could become. And in the arithmetic of a father's love, that was a bargain he'd make 1,000 times over. Elena's laughter drifted through the house as she played with Ranger in the backyard, and Cameron smiled. His daughter was home, safe and happy. The war was over. He had won. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.